everyone. Welcome. I'm Irina Chisma, Head of Marketing at Castify, and I'll be your host today. I'm super happy to see so many of you joining live for this session. And I want to tell you what sparked this webinar. Years ago, I pitched an idea. I really believed in. I shared it with the team, brought it to leadership, only to get a polite no. 3 months later, a consultant pitched the same exact thing, but this time it was instantly approved. Why? Because someone paid extra for that particular idea. And that stuck with me. In CS, we give away so much value. It's onboarding, QBR, strategic consulting, and it's all bundled in as support. But the moment there's a price tag associated to it, the same work is taken more seriously. So today we are asking, where do we draw the line between that what's free, and what's paid in customer success? When does free become too expensive for us and for the customer? And to help me unpack this, I've invited two brilliant minds in customer success. I'm talking with Claire Knight, founder at the Onboarding Lab, who's worked with tons of teams on building high-impact onboarding that actually drives adoption. And on the other side is Jamie McQueen, partner success at Stellic, who navigated this exact tension across CS professional services and strategic accounts. Jamie, Claire, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A few housekeeping rules before we get started. This session is being recorded, so you'll get the replay. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat, and we'll try to take some as we go or during the Q&A at the end. And now, before we dive in, I want to get a quick pulse for everyone who is joining us live. And I'm going to publish a poll. Give me one second. One second. Publish. Do you guys see it? Okay. So the poll is, does your CS offering include paid services or not? It's basically yes, no. And for those of you who are voting yes, I'm curious what's the distribution of the services that you have as paid included. We'll give it a few moments so that everyone has a chance to engage and to participate. Also, for the ones who joined late, we want to see if your CS offering includes paid services or not. And if you picked yes, drop them in the chat. And while you guys are voting, I want to start the conversation, and I want to ask you, Jamie, why do you think so many companies default to giving CS away for free?
I think it's really driven by they haven't spent the time to define as an organization what you want to support your customers in. I think especially in the startup world or smaller organizations, CS usually comes later. It's the last thing to sort of be resourced. It's one of those, oh yeah, we have to do it, and we don't really know what we want it to be, how it aligns with who we serve from our organization. And it's an afterthought, honestly. And I think once they start, it gets really difficult to get out of that. They just haven't spent the defining it up front after implementation and onboarding. What does that experience look post-sale?
It seems like the distribution is somehow equally. It's somehow 50 for the ones who said yes, we do have paid services. Contribute in the chat and let us know which are those. Claire, have you ever delivered high value work, but because it was free, it didn't land the way it should?
Yes. An answer. Yeah, I've worked in a few different sizes of companies and a few different types of products, and I think it does vary depending on whether it's B2C, B2B, it's startup, enterprise, and what kind of, if it's a complex product or not. It really does depend on the type of user you have, and therefore it depends on what value they put on your time or your resource that you're providing them. I often find that if it's a simpler product, a lot of people go, I can just do this myself. Like, why would I pay for something extra, even if you've, validated the value that you would be providing, or you've justified the cost. I think that can be a puzzle piece that sometimes people assume, I can charge for everything, it's fine. But you have to take some of these things into account, that actually, if it's a simple product, probably they just want to get going with it, and they just want to start playing with it and using it. They don't want to have to give you an hour of their time to have a phone call about something, and that's how we justify charging for it. So I think there are pros and cons, and you have to just really think through it strategically in order to make it worthwhile.
I want to break this down, and let's see what should always be free and what makes sense to charge for. And I want to take a look from the customer perspective and from the company perspective. And since you've worked with different type of organization, Claire, I want you to represent the customer voice. And I want to ask you, which of the services do customers expect for free, and which one they usually expect to pay when it comes to customer success?
Well, following on from what I just said, I feel like it does depend quite a bit.
Let's give some examples, because I really liked the way you frame it, and you said, okay, if it's B2B, if it's B2C, depending on the type, on the journey of the company. Let's give some examples. For instance, if you are talking with a B2B startup, or if you are talking with a B2C company, a more mature company.
Okay, so say you have a B2B product that is somewhat complex. It's not, you kind of need a little bit of hand-holding. In that scenario, I think it's very accepted and expected that you will have someone guiding you through onboarding. It's something that you would appreciate as a customer, knowing that you've got some support that's not just a support team, it's someone dedicated to give you that partnership. And in that scenario, I've never seen a pushback on a charge for onboarding, because the value is there. They want the time, they want the interaction, they want that assistance. They want to have someone that they can call directly and not have to go through a support team that maybe they've never spoken to, and they have to find their ticket, and that someone that they can call and they know exactly the whole scenario, they know everything, the history of the sales cycle, everything like that. I think there's a lot of value with that.
I want to ask you, how do you define? You mentioned that if it's a B2B customer that has somehow of a complex product. Let's define what falls into complex, or what do you consider? What's your definition of sort of complex?
I mean, I think that's kind of difficult to answer, but I mean, in my experience, it's something that you can't just log in, make your own account and start using.
Okay.
There's integrations that need to happen. Perhaps you have to onboard multiple users. Perhaps there's different permissions for different users. Like, the list could go on, but I would see it as something that is a bit more involved than someone being able to just sign up themselves and start using a product.
Okay. And but if we talk about B2C product, are they also used to pay for onboarding?
In my experience, no, and I think you probably would get somewhat of a negative reaction. And the reason I say this is that the people that are signing up for B2C products are usually, it's one person, so it's one user, one person in a company who's using their own money or a minimal budget that they get from their manager. If you stick an onboarding fee on top of that and it's a self-serve product that's B2C, it's probably not going to go down very well, I would say, in my experience. And I think if you often don't have like that direct link with an onboarding manager or a CSM in those scenarios, So again, you've got a question mark over what exactly is this fee? It's just a lot of potential roadblocks and moments to piss people off, if I can use that language.
Would you, or can you tie up, or is there a connection between the ARR and the paid services? The higher the ARR, you could assume that the product is more complex and you need an onboarding fee or extra paid services in CS?
I mean, again, this is kind of tricky to answer as like a blanket thing, but
Okay.
if you are charging, if you have a higher average contract value, people, if they're paying that much, they will accept and probably expect an onboarding fee that is a reasonable amount. It's just that's not going to be a recurring fee, whereas the contract will be. And I think in my experience, that's not something that I've ever come across in high ticket, high value customers where they've been a bit negative about any onboarding fees.
Okay. If we switch now from an organization point of view, when companies decide to formalize this process or to have paid CS services, how do they decide what stays in customer success versus what gets built separately, Jamie?
Yeah, I'll be honest, it's not an easy one. And it's a little bit of trial and error. I think so I've been in models where it's paid, you pay for a level of CS. I've been in models where there's a base that everybody gets the same amount and certain things we charge for. And so the most important thing is to define your core values and who you're serving and know your audience. So I've spent 20 plus years in the ed tech space. So working with colleges, universities, K-12 school districts, nonprofits. So really understanding who they are and what they typically have paid for in that space. It's very different if you were to go to maybe, a B2B that's in software security or a large Fortune 500 company that you're serving. So one is you have to know what their tolerance is and who they are and what's sort of expected in that marketplace. And then clearly define as an organization what's the most important to you. So I know in the spaces that we've worked in that we have said, okay, we need in order for retention, and we know what churn risks are for our what do we need to do to be on top and forward thinking to mitigate that? And those pieces we would do for free. So whether that's sort of a quarterly check-in, a monthly check-in, and we would tier things based on the type of account, whether it was strategic, whether it was high value, whether, different things. So defining also too what leads to churn can help define some of this. And then when we broke it down by the different services, I often thought about it as things that had a clearly defined beginning and end. So sort of what Claire was talking about with onboarding, there's a clearly defined beginning and end. I'd also argue that if they have some money in the game in onboarding, they tend to roll up their sleeves and more engaged than if you don't. The second thing I've noticed too is that if they are charged for things that move them along quicker or provide a value that you want to lead them to, that they can't get there by themselves. So, sometimes for us working in the industry that I work in, they have infinite demands and finite resources. They are already strapped. They're already being defunded a lot of times. And so, hey, if we charge them for X, we would definitely propel them faster to be able to adopt something else or move them along. And so I think, but the core is you got to know who you're serving and what it is that you have to do as an organization to provide the best experience to help retain them. And then all the others you can decide if you want to charge or not charge for.
Because we started with the heavy part of things. And we promised we'll take the questions in the context of the conversation. We already have some questions. I think I'll pass the first one to you, Claire. is basically how do you price the onboarding, depending on complexity, number of days, fixed package, and how would you manage if the cost of onboarding gets high compared to the subscription? I'll let you start, Claire, and then Jamie, feel free to contribute as well.
Yeah, I'm trying really hard not to say it depends to every question. But I think the way that I've done this in the past with when I was starting to figure out some of these packages was there is an element of taking into consideration how much time and effort and resources are spent on onboarding. So if in regards to this question around complexity, that's quite a broad term and that can mean a lot of things. It could mean that you have to get your dev department in order to do an integration, or maybe there's some custom work that's needed. And those things, as Jamie, I think, was alluding to there, like you should charge for some extra things, that anything that's custom, that should be something that is chargeable. But I like to do tiers of onboarding. So that kind of caters for fluctuations, right? So if something is starting to look like it could become a bit more work than normal, you have the ability to say, okay, that looks like it's going to fit in this tier rather than the standard tier. In terms of number of days and whether it's a fixed package, number of days, I don't know. It depends how long your onboarding is. Sorry, I said it depends. But your onboarding length, I've worked in companies where the onboarding was a month. I've worked in companies where it's been 3 months. And so you wouldn't necessarily charge per day with something that was 3 months, because that gets a bit out of hand, right? So I think you have to weigh up around what's the workload. Is there any custom work? And then, you don't want it going to be more than the actual contract value. That is going to be very hard to convince a customer that it's worth it, unless you're doing something really amazing, which you might be. But I think there's some kind of, you have to just do a bit of weighing up between, I don't think this is a very good answer, sorry, but it's really hard to answer without some context. But I would say have some tiers, have some variation, allow yourself to chop and change it. It doesn't have to remain the same amount for every single customer. Customers don't need to know how much other people are being charged. I wouldn't vary it too much, but it should be relevant to the workload that's being put in.
The only thing I would add to that is don't over-engineer it, because you can make this so complicated that it gets really hard for the sales team to even try to sell it, price it. It can get really complicated internally. So, you can pretty much do a SWOT of what you've done, get an idea. Sometimes you're going to be under, sometimes you're going to be over, and then you can make those adjustments yearly or quarterly. The other thing too is, depending on the sales process, the sales team is going to take one stab at after listening to the customer. And I think all of us on the CS side have heard, oh, this will be an easy one. Anytime I hear that, I was like, oh, no, it isn't. And so how can you get in front of the customer or have a few discovery questions that only the implementation team really knows what those answers are going to mean, to really get a deeper analysis of like, no, this is actually a harder one, so it's going to be this level versus that level. Your implementation and onboarding team knows what those things are that the sales team isn't. So that can help as well to get a good, but it's up to you and the CS team to either get yourself engaged in that process or get those questions to the sales team. And they might not understand, like, oh yeah, that's a weird answer, but to you all, it means they don't have the right people at the table. They don't have, you're going to uncover the right things to give you a better idea of where they should be in the onboarding.
And I'll just quickly add to that as well, Jamie. I think you made a really good point there about the sales cycle. And I've been a big advocate for bringing in onboarding representation into the end of the sales cycle to cater for that conversation and make sure that the right information is there in order to price that properly. And I liken it to Apple stores when you have Apple geniuses and you know that they are the expert and you can go to them, you can ask them specifically what they are. There's like a trusted pillar in that store. It's the same for if you're in a sales cycle and you bring in the onboarding representative, whoever that is, to the end of the sales cycle to kind of be that representative of what's coming and help make sure that that package is correct. I think that's really valuable. And I think it really helps to set the tone for the customer of, okay, I understand what I'm paying for right now.
I think somehow indirectly both of you answered to the question, who decides if something should be chargeable or not. And I think it's a combination between sales, CS. So it shouldn't be based on what both of you said, it shouldn't be only sales who decides the pricing for, it should be a collaboration. Because CS should actually be able to assess the onboarding time, or what does it mean for a customer to be successful. And depending on the type of customer that you are bringing into the organization, the definition of success is, as you said, Claire, it depends. So if it depends, it somehow the pricing also should be flexible. Yeah, we have a few more questions. It seems like this is a hot topic. So Michelle is telling us on chat, we have a sales team that often offers up our CS team's time and services for free. We've been talking about that, we know. Seemingly unlimited customer support. How do we reframe this CS time? Where should we expect to charge for training or further client support? Jenny, do you want to pick it up?
Yeah. So I think what's important to say here is there's no right or wrong. So some organizations may decide to never charge for things because that is the right situation for them. However, you still have to be really aware of where you're spending your time, because it's really easy to get sucked into things that are not going to really boost retention and or expansion and keep your customers. So that's a balance. When it comes to the sales team, if you're a leader and or individual contributor, you need to know what the sales team is saying when they are selling your product. So that is not just the leader of CS's responsibility. If you are new to an organization and you're a CSM, the very first thing you should ask for is, hey, can I watch a sales demo? Because that way you hear up front what they're saying externally. You have a better understanding of, like, if you're onboarding, where customers are coming from. Like, it's a step that's often overlooked. So if you are a CSM right now and you've never watched a sales video, go back and ask for that video. I think it is up to the CS department to give sales correct information and how they want to position onboarding and how they want to position the services you provide. You can't just go, a customer is just going to tell you what they think they heard, and they always hear what they want to hear anyway. So you can't just say, like, hey, the customer told me everything's included. Okay, we'll go back and see what they said, where were expectations set, and then have a clear and open dialogue. Now, I've been very fortunate to have very good relationships with my leaders within CS, but it was intentional. We worked, and when I came back and said, hey, look, the way you guys are saying this is unintentionally leaving this expectation with the customer. And I gave an example of where this went off the rails or where this landed us in a hot spot. And once you provide that context to them, they were like, oh, I said, it was subtle, but when they hear that word, they think everything. And clearly define it for the team up front. And that's where I went back as a CS team. If you can't define it, then your sales team can't sell it. And you can't, decide what to sell for. So, and be specific in your words. Like, support means you have access to our in-product support team that is sort of real time and can answer your questions. You have access to our user community. You have access to, define those things out. You can always give more, but it's very difficult to take things away. So, make sure that you are feeding them, and it's not hey, the sales team did it again, and which, you hear, right? All of us have been to CS stuff, and there's always this quiet tension in the room. So you have to be the leader there and step up and put it in context of, hey, look, you did the hard work to land this customer. I want to do my best to make sure they're fully utilizing the product so they become referenceable for you so you can continue to expand our business. And that usually is a win for both. I hope that answers the question from whoever posted that. So.
If it doesn't, guys, feel free to come up with follow-ups. I'm monitoring both the chat and the question tab, and there is a lot of, I would say, action into both tabs. I want to take another question. I want to make sure that everybody who attends live gets out of it with their questions answered. So we are a small company and we have an onboarding package. How do you handle when onboarding is complete and the trained champion leaves that company? CS has to retrain or leave the client in jeopardy. Do you invoice for that? Yes or no?
Yeah, this is something that we actively did in one of the companies that I worked at. We found that this was happening quite regularly, and it was impacting the success of the customer every single time. So what we did was we created re-onboarding packages. Whether that's the best name for it, I don't know, but that's what we used. And it was essentially I suppose like a sped up version of the onboarding. So we didn't put them back through the whole thing again, but the new champions were completely new to it. So I think if we had done that, it wouldn't have been a problem. And we did charge for it. So we created re-onboarding packages that we put forward as something that they needed. And often someone might have had some sort of handover between the person that left and the new person, but it was usually minimal because our platform was a very small part of the whole job that they were handing over. So we usually found that regardless of if they had a handover, we needed to give them some support, and we never had any pushback on charging for that. And I think it's because probably a timing thing. If you've got someone that is a healthy customer, that is being successful, they're seeing results, they want to maintain that level of success. I don't know that would have worked necessarily if a customer was already not using it or starting to kind of slowly churn and weren't getting any results. I think coming in then and asking for them to pay for some extra training if they'd already sort of checked out or whatever, maybe that would have had a different result. But for the customers that were doing well, it just was a changeover of staff, then we wanted to make sure we jumped on that really quickly. And I think that is a note for really keeping track of your champions and having a close enough relationship that you don't find a month after they've left is when you find out that they've left. I know that's not always the easiest thing, depending on how many customers you have and how everything works, but I think it's an important one because that will be an indicator of churn if you start to lose the champions.
Jamie, the next question is for you from Benjamin. He is interested in the use of language here. Is it onboarding, training, consultancy, support? What do clients value the most? And of course, sectors are all different. Speaking about, it depends on the industry, type of product, complexity. So what does Jamie see being used the most, for instance, in EdTech?
Yeah, so I think the most confusing one I think out there is implementation or onboarding, and then they also say it's training. And I think those are different things. And so onboarding or implementation, I think a lot of places understand what those are, even in the ed tech space. I think your organization needs to define it. Now, I've worked in places where internally they thought training and implementation was the same thing. And I was like, no. Like implementation is all your setup, getting things ready to go, optimizing the system for your business needs and business cases. Like that's onboarding. And onboarding typically has a finite date. Training, never ends if you really want customers continue to utilize your product. So what Claire was talking about, just that re-engagement also involves a level of that. Like depending on your industry, maybe there's high turnover. You get a third of that customer's users are new every year, right? That's ongoing training, different than maybe your initial onboarding. In the CS space and ed tech, you have to avoid certain words. Like you would never say to a customer, I'm coming in to do a QBR. Like what? Like no. Like no. You're usually not saying here's your ROI. You're saying here's your value, here's your outcomes. Even though that like they're, no money, no mission if you're a nonprofit often, but they're just not looking at it that way. So if you are making a shift to the ed tech space, or you are selling in a different space or CSMing and coming over, you just have to learn the vocabulary. If you're working with academic institutions, they don't go by quarters. They have funky calendar years, right? Like July to June. I mean, you have to just translate things. I think all the current terms work. You just have to sometimes explain them closer, right? Because implementation is one of those words that they think it never ends. So that is one thing in the ed tech space. And I don't know, Claire, you might see this in others. It just doesn't end. And sometimes I found the word onboarding was a lot easier to use because it allowed a cleaner transition over to monthly trainings and the user community and different things like that. So I think you just have to really define those and know your audience. And the fastest thing I've seen of people moving into the ed tech space is they don't understand the vocabulary of the industry they're in. And there are resources out there. The Chronicle of Higher Ed has a great one. And I've worked internationally, and those will still translate internationally when it comes to that ed tech space. But you're not saying your customers, you're saying the students you serve, you have to really change your vocabulary a little bit. And then they'll hear you. Because if you don't, even though it's the same thing at the end of the day, if you don't put it in their language, they're not going to listen. So
I think the way we frame it, as you mentioned, Jamie, is very important. Now, and speaking of, okay, how do we communicate? How do we present it? We touched upon in the answers that we gave up until now, but I wanna recap it. What's the best way we can present those paid services so they don't feel like a cost, but they feel like an added value? Should they be presented in the sales as a package? Do they come along the way? Is it do we divide bad cup or good cup, and the sales is the one who communicates the price and the CS remains the one who provides the value? What's the best strategy? And if it depends, let's pick two. So that we give some examples.
Well, I'll just go first. So
yeah.
A big learning for me was building, and Jamie's already touched on this, but building that internal relationship with sales and marketing. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you have to give them specific context. You have to explain what's in it, not only for the customer, but what's in it for the salesperson. Explaining, you have to work out whether, they're going to get extra commission or what it means to them. I think is a really powerful thing you can't just create something and say, this is what it is, go sell that, because they're like, oh, okay. And the one thing I have really noticed is that I had to put a stop to was sales would discount on the services they're doing. Yes. They would waive the onboarding fee as a way to get a deal over the line. And that to me was like a big no-no, because it just undervalued what we were doing. And on a side note to that, there is like a psychological principle called the endowment effect, where essentially it means or suggests that if something has a price attached to it, people are much more invested in it, right? Which is what we've kind of already touched upon. And I think that's a key example of it in action, where if someone discounts it and you have no say over it as an onboarding team, it's a bit like, oh no, I know that they're not going to be as invested in this. So I think that relationship piece is super, super important, but you also have to make it super easy for the sales team to know what they can and can't do, what they should and shouldn't say, what specific packages are like. And also, in my experience, trying to build up this picture of a world-class onboarding experience for a customer starts from marketing and sales. What you don't want is to have a full sales cycle, and at the end, the salesperson goes, oh, and then you're going to be onboarded and it's going to cost this much. That does nothing for building trust, for getting someone excited about the process, all those kind of things. So building that relationship, as we've already mentioned, super key. I'm going to let Jamie carry on before I ramble.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah. The only thing I would add is in the sales process, you probably have things as an organization that are defined that you charge for, like contractually at the initial sale, right? So maybe it is an enhanced CS package that includes things like, I worked at an organization where we had, they could sell things up front. So our customer support it added to the ARR, and it included things like certain level of professional hours a year. So when you're working with a customer, you could say, hey, you bought that, like they paid for it ahead of time. So they had X number of hours to use for professional services from us. And we had an entire catalog of professional services were available. So that's one thing you can charge for often, right? Maybe it's an on-site training. Maybe it's, you're helping create workflows in their product form, for example. You're actually doing some work on their behalf. Sometimes when that's included up front, the customers don't have to go ask for budget again. Maybe it included passes to your annual conference. Like there's several things that you can think about that you can charge for and add as an annual sort of customer service, customer success package that aren't just maybe it's an on-site visit every year. I'm just throwing out different things that we've used. The one thing I have found, because you were asking about how do you deliver when you want to charge for something? Mm-hmm. I don't believe you call back in the sales team, because you and CS have this strong relationship with the customer. And oftentimes these conversations come up organically. And it's more like, hey, we've been talking for a while and I've been listening, and it seems like the reason you can't move forward with X is because you don't have the resources. You don't have this. Here's what I think we could do for you. Like, I could find a resource for you to come in, set all this stuff up for you again, or work with you one-on-one and consult. But we may have to charge for that. Now, if your sales up front said, hey, we also offer a variety of additional services when the time comes, they've heard that once, so they're not surprised by it. And then you just price accordingly, and it has a finite beginning and an end. So, you don't have to have it all figured out. Sometimes if sales just says, hey, there are times where we can provide you additional help and support, and sometimes there's a small, there's a charge for that. People have heard about it. If you have, like, I worked at a place, we had a professional services catalog. So we had things, and we also sold like credits, like hours, like, certain projects were so many credits, and every year they had so many to use. And as a CSM, now that was awesome, because you could be like, hey, I really want you to start working on X, and it's not going to cost you any money because it's already in your ARR. And so the teams didn't have to go ask for money, especially in the ed tech space or working with the customers I have. They get to ask for money once a year. And if it's not in the budget, when that budget's signed, there is no way for them to get any more money. And so you were also setting them up for more success. And so it's just understanding your customer base there.
Irina, can I just quickly add one small thing? Something to think about that is adjacent to this is onboarding qualified leads. And we have like CS qualified leads, obviously, throughout the life cycle. But if you have an onboarding experience that's like really slick and you've worked a lot in kind of iterating on it, having something that is an onboarding qualified lead just starts to elevate the team as well, in terms of if you have a successful onboarding and you've identified that there's some expansion during onboarding. Like that's a really powerful thing, just data-wise and various other reasons, but just elevating the team. So just a side note to have a think about is consider having that as another metric.
What's the definition of it's the first time when I'm familiar with marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, customer success qualified lead, but it's the first time when I'm hearing onboarding qualified lead. Can you expand a bit on this?
Yeah, I mean, we may well have made it up in our previous company, but it was actually something that was helpful to be measured on, because it was not only useful for the team to have something to kind of work towards. They weren't necessarily the ones selling it. It was maybe passed on to a CS team or account management team to continue, but they were the ones that did such a successful onboarding that they'd already identified some options for expansion or just revenue growth for a customer during onboarding. And that could also have been a referral to another customer, any number of things that were a way to increase the revenue. But it also was really helpful for us to measure the success of onboarding as a whole, because we were measuring from CSAT, and we had an onboarding kind of qualified score at the end of onboarding, how successful it was. We asked the customer that. But outside of that, we wanted some more metrics that were just highlighting the value of a really good onboarding and the impact it had. And it was very obvious when we had poor onboardings that those onboarding qualified leads were not there or really far away.
Let's do a quick recap. Let's say someone here wants to start charging for a service tomorrow. Where do they even begin with? Jamie, what's your advice? Where should they start from?
Define what it is that you're offering, the value, the why, and let's say it's something new you want to offer. And take the scenario that you might be something you want to upsell to customers. You could do a teaser to it, offer a little bit of a snippet to kind of introduce folks to it. And then, go back and offer it to certain customers. I often find if you're introducing a new service, you're rolling it out slowly and not to the masses. You're really going to the customers that you think will want to purchase that or might have the funding for it. That way you're building up some actual use cases you're learning, and then have some testimonials to do it for it. And then decide, like, do we just want to do this for new customers coming in versus our current customers? Depending on where you are, any of us who've been in startups, your legacy customers, like, no way. Like, they just came in under a different setup. They probably have gotten everything. They are the hardest group to transition to having to potentially pay for services that they probably had before. So you might make a decision. We're only going to offer this to new customers that come in. And that's sometimes a cleaner and easier slate. Or you're going to your CSMs and you're saying, who has mentioned that they might want this? And you just have the conversation. You may determine to charge a different price for current customers versus new customers coming into during that transition.
Let's also give some examples of concrete paid services that where our audience can think of. If they don't have paid services in their current CS offering, half of our audience didn't. What can be included? Onboarding is one of them. What else? Well, let's divide, because onboarding feels like there are so many where there can be several services that can fit under onboarding. Let's divide this as well if you think it's necessary.
So first off the top of my mind is training, some level of training. Now, as an organization, most customers think you will provide some level of training, that it's self-serve, a help center, a monthly free webinar. But Training is one where you might go on site, you might do a custom training just to their people, their specific thing. That's one. Any sort of professional services, maybe you're consulting with them, maybe you're sitting down helping them redo their customer flow or their customer journey. Those are things that I think you can charge for. Anything around data you can often charge for. So if it's annual maintenance of that data, new integrations that they want to stand up and they need your help for, those are something you can charge for. Those are things that just pop into my head right away. I'm sure Claire has a few more.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of area is onboarding. So I think some of those fit into onboarding as well, like the integration setup. I think anything that is potentially a do-it-for-you service. So potentially in an onboarding, you might offer for a fee to set something up for them so that the customer doesn't have to do that. That is something that you could do. Re-onboarding, as we've already mentioned, when there's turnover on the customer side, I think that's a really valid thing to charge for at any point, and you can keep charging it if they keep having turnover. Onboarding as a whole, I'm trying to think how you would break onboarding down. I think it can get too complicated, to be honest. If you start charging for different things in onboarding, I would just create an onboarding package as a whole, and within that there is training, there is some education of some sort, there's assistance with any sort of implementation setup, so integrations, data transfers, anything like that should all come under that one package. In my experience, that seems to be the easiest way to communicate it to customers.
It's somehow related to what we charge for. And I saw that you dropped on chat the fact that you are working on an onboarding ROI calculator, and usually an ROI calculator or a business case usually helps justify the cost or the investment. What are key things that you take into account in that ROI calculator that you've built, the pillars of the tool?
Yeah, it's still being built, so we'll see. This could change, but obviously one section is charging for onboarding. A lot of companies don't, and highlighting the revenue that's being missed on that is important. There's a piece around the resource time. So I've worked in companies where there's been an onboarding manager, but there's also been a CSM, and there's also support, and there's also someone from the engineering team that had to help with some integrations, and maybe there was some custom building. And if you start adding up all of those resources, the time spent, the money you have on your team, it often can add up really quick in terms of man hours. And so you actually end up losing money on some customers because it's like a hidden cost that you don't really think about. It's kind of just part of it. But if you start kind of actually calculating that, then you can really see the impact of trying to streamline that process, whether that's the timeline, whether that's, I suppose, timeline, the people involved, any number of things like that, I think is important to try and calculate, which is really hard to do. This is why I'm building this calculator, because I think it is a complex thing to try and figure out. And then there's a few other pieces of the puzzle that I'm implementing. So it's not fully built yet, but the idea of it from my side is to help the leaders, C-suite, VP level, understand the impact of not investing in onboarding or not improving your onboarding, not iterating on your onboarding, because that's the hard part. If there's a lot of individual contributors on this webinar, we can talk about it until the cows come home, but will they actually be able to implement anything if they haven't got the leadership kind of buy-in? And I think the way to get leadership buy-in is just to put the numbers in front of them, which is why I think this calculator is my way of trying to kind of highlight that for people. So yeah, TBC, we'll see, it's coming.
I think did we lost Jamie? I think we've lost somehow. I think we
lost internet.
Oh, okay, we lost it. Most probably she will come back. I wanna end this conversation by asking you, what was the thing that you would, or looking back, what's one thing you wish you'd done differently when it comes to pricing the onboarding work that you do?
I wish I'd done it sooner. And I think the
Okay.
reason that I hadn't was because I was trying to make it perfect. So if there's any advice I could give to anyone, I would say start simple. Don't try and overcomplicate and create the perfect package. Just start with an onboarding fee, a fee. I mean, I'm talking from onboarding, but CS maybe is different. But start with a fee that's maybe simple, easy to kind of implement, gets approval from internal teams, and just outline the main pieces that come with that and just iterate on it. I think we were kind of scared to get it wrong and to keep iterating with each customer, but it doesn't really matter. And I think the longer you hold off, there's no reason to do it really. So I think that was my regret, was just not doing it soon enough and not just trying a simple thing and then iterating on it.
Jamie, you are back. We've lost you for a few minutes. We were wrapping up the conversation by asking the question: what's one thing you wish you've done differently when it comes to pricing the CS work? Can you?
Yeah, sorry about that. We have some storms rolling through, so
No worries. No worries.
so I got kicked out. One thing I would do different is I wouldn't overcomplicate it. I think when I first tried, it was like, let's define every type of service we could offer and really nail down the price for that. Where I think I would kind of just put it in different buckets and yeah, I think I just overthought it and tried to think of every potential like thing we could offer, and instead look at historically what has caused churn and see if start there on what services, like if we could have done X, would it have made a difference, and then go from there. You can complicate this extremely. It's to the extreme, I guess.
I just realized that we've been talking about what are the things that we should basically have as paid services, but what are the ones that should be free. So one more round. What should remain free from your perspective?
Frontline customer support, where a customer can go to, whether you're leveraging AI, there's some awesome tools out there. The customer need to not pay to get a question answered or access information. And I also think user community should never be charged for. Because if you can build a strong user community, those folks tend to start to take some of the day-to-day grind off of a CSM, especially if you're having to play all three roles, and they help each other out. They give best practices. Those are two things that I don't think you should ever charge for.
Claire, what's your take on this? I don't think we can hear you. Where?
Classic. Yeah, I think I would agree with Jamie on those. The only thing I would add is just any form of education that you have available, whether that's help center or video content or anything that is just kind of ongoing. If a customer's being proactive about wanting to learn more about something, don't charge for that, because that's good for adoption.
Thank you both. We discussed about what should be free, what should be paid, how can we better communicate it, when can we better say it, how do we team up with other teams in order to smoothly transmit this information to the customer. Thank you for both of you for taking the time to talk to us today. And for those of you thinking about how to scale your CS operations without increasing the headcount, just by adding the right tools and the processes, reach out to us, because we at Castify can for sure help. As promised at the beginning of this session, we'll send the recording shortly, and we hope to see you at the next webinar in the second half of October, but more on that soon. Until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.